Thank you very much. I also would like to thank the organizers and partners who made this conference possible. My broader project examines how the transfer, generation, distribution, and consumption of electricity triggered a range of encounters and dialogues among the state authorities, city administration, multinational investors, experts, workers, and consumers in late Ottoman and early Republican Istanbul. And I question how electricity network of artifacts, knowledge, labor, and political ideologies reinforce new hierarchies and inequalities in institutions in the city's natural and built environment. And in this conference, actually, I will try to understand the political rationality behind technological choices when various governing agencies were active in the city. Historian Gabriel Hecht claims that technologies have played a crucial role in creating an arena for political negotiation, noting that the practice of using a technology in political processes and or toward political aims constitute technopolitics. So building on this, one main question lies at the center of my paper. How did electricity use, and in some cases its non-use, became a strategic tool in the materialization of occupied Istanbul's multiple political actors' goal? But first of all, I would like to provide a brief background. Starting in the early 1880s, in the most densely populated cities and commercially developed world cities such as London, New York, Paris, Berlin, Tokyo, newly founded electricity companies collaborated with the local government and municipal authorities to establish power plants, develop city grids, and generate electricity for urban utilities, including illumination, transportation, heating, and communication. And at this time, Istanbul, the capital and the crucial port city of the Ottoman Empire, also attracted the interest of international electricity companies as a lucrative investment opportunity. However, prior to 1908, the private use of electric appliances and lighting remained limited to privileged segments of Ottoman society, including the navy, the royal family, consulates, and a few private entrepreneurs. And apart from select hospitals and educational institutions, just a few public places had electric illumination. Nevertheless, at the turn of the 20th century, the expansion of electricity usage in urban utilities such as lighting, transportation, and communication elsewhere in the world heightened Istanbulites' inclination towards an electrified future. And scientific debates and popular press articles, coverage of technology, sciences, and industrial development also pushed for a renewed focus on the usage of electricity as a new century's driving force. In contrast to the previous regime's skepticism on electricity use, the Committee of Union and Progress administrators considered electricity as a public service that a larger population could use, rather than a source of energy for a small and privileged elite. In 1910, the Ottoman Ministry of Public Works deemed the Austrian-Hungarian gas electric company the most suitable bidder of the 8 foreign companies that filed tenders for the electrification of the European side and Suriçi of Istanbul. And here you can see the name of the bidding companies. The gas company was granted a 50-year concession, and soon after a joint stock company, which will be subject to Ottoman regulations and rules, was established in April 1911 and named the Ottoman Anonymous Electricity Company. The Ottoman government assigned land to the gas company in Silahdara towards the end of the Golden Horn, which is a natural harbor at the junction of 2 streams. And in the early months of 1914, after the construction of the power plant, the plant started to supply electricity to Istanbul trams and 3 substations in Beyazıt, Suriçi, Tozkoparan, Peragalata, and İstinye along the Bosphorus for private users. After the power plant started operating, all the shares of electricity company were transferred to Sofina, which was a holding company created by Belgian and German banks in 1898. Since Sofina was a leading company with capital and expertise in establishing large-scale electrical infrastructure in many parts of the world, such as Austria-Hungary, Belgium, Denmark, France, Portugal, Russia, Spain, and Argentina, the Ottomans expected that the electrification of Istanbul would follow a rapid path, encouraging the use of electricity in public, private, and industrial industrial areas. However, by the outbreak of World War I, this electrification mosaic, in which the capitals and technical expertise of Germany, France, and Belgium played a prominent role, would crumble, removing the German-Hungarian capital from the picture at the end of the war. And in our first day, actually, Ayşe Özül give some examples how German capital was replaced by other countries in Galat port. In occupied Istanbul as well, the company became a Franco-Belgian company. During the war, products and technical equipment required for electric lighting could not reach Istanbul, while the boilers and other machines in the gas plants also went offline. In addition, routine use was complicated by persistent coal shortages. Many enterprises and factories, including passenger and cargo ship, naval ships, gas plants, Silahdağı power plant, used local coal. But after the Russian bombing of the Zonguldak mines at the beginning of the war, local supply was also compromised. Towards the end of the war, the constant increases in price of fuel placed a heavy burden on operating the expenses of the power plant and electricity tram companies. The dark streets generated problems for public order, and it was expressed quite clearly in the correspondence between the police department, the Ministry of Public Works, and the electricity company. Any outage caused by a technical problem or a coal shortage should have been reported to the police station right away. This was vital to provide public order, particularly at night. Otherwise, the security forces will be insufficient to ensure during blackouts. When the Ottoman Empire and Allied forces signed the Armistice of Mudros on October 30th in 1918, the city dwellers expected the devastating effects of the First World War to come to an end. Barely 2 weeks after the armistice was signed, the French and British armies entered into Istanbul, and a high board of commissioners of the Allied forces was founded to identify problems in the city and make decisions necessary to sustain peace and order. However, the war's effect on all aspects of life persisted, and since we have been covering it for 2 days, I will not go into detail about the situation, the daily life situation during the armistice period. In the early months of the armistice period, coal scarcity continued to remain a critical issue. Until the end of the World War I, the Ottoman Empire met its fuel needs from Ereğli, Zonguldak, Batum, Kirkuk, and Musul, with occasional imports from Romania and Germany. However, following the occupation, the German officers in charge of organizing the coal mines in Zonguldak left the Ottoman lands, and miners left their jobs or went on strike due to poor working conditions. This resulted in a significant reduction in coal production, which sometimes came to a halt. The correspondence between the Ministries of Public Works and Internal Affairs demonstrate that the critical situation compelled state officials to take a variety of measures. In the final days of November 1918, Ziya Pasha, the current Minister of Public Works, considered asking the Allied Forces Commandership for assistance for providing British coal. The authorized British admiral's response was rather negative. He blamed the Ottoman authorities for the poor management of coal supply and informed them that the Allied forces would be unable to assist them because the local government had not anticipated the consequences of war and had wasted a large amount of electricity by not limiting its use to lighting and transportation. For several years in Great Britain, for example, he said, entertainment activities were halted at certain hours and the illumination services remained quite limited. Even using a lighting equipment other than a single lamp with 25 candles was prohibited. However, the admiral was concerned about what the British and French people would say if the Allied forces provided coal to the Ottoman authorities to electrify Istanbul, since there was a universal shortage of coal. Following this acrimonious response, the Ottoman government implemented service changes such as power outages in areas lacking vital urban structure, tram closures after 8 p.m., minimum consumption imposed on hotels, factories, and other utilities, imposition of daylight hours on stores to end all electricity usage, and the end of nighttime activities at cinemas and theaters. These measures will be monitored by both Allied and local police forces. On top of these restrictions, the tramway company, citing increasing cost burdens due to the First World War, suggested quadrupling tram tariffs. When the municipality rejected this massive increase, however, the company stopped all tram services. By December 3rd, 1918, all the tram cars were stored in depots. The city's coast scarcity, on the other hand, not only halted vital urban services, but also had the potential to impede Allied powers' mobility and communication. Soon after, the Allied powers decided that around 4,000 tons of coal from Britain would be allocated to the city's various services while the Zonguldak mines were reorganized. The British High Commissioner, Commander Eady, explained certain restrictions on the limited supply of coal. Terkos water supply, electric power station necessary for the supply power for flour mills and electric lighting, and Anatolian railway necessary for the movement of German and Austrian troops, as well as demobilized Turkish troops, were the three essential services that required immediate coal distribution. The Turkish authorities were warned that any coal used for purposes other than those specified would result in the confiscation of the remainder. Factories, hotels, and tram services were deemed secondary. The tram services were of no importance to the Allied forces, explicitly stated Commander Eady. Since there was a universal shortage of coal, the priority order to be considered in the use of coal was stated as follows: the Allied powers, neutrals, and enemy, if and when a surplus remains. This case, I believe, is significant because it demonstrates that even in the early years of the armistice periods, the words of a higher official of the Allied powers who promised to keep peace and order in the city continued to echo with the war terminology. Needless to say, the tensions of the occupation era were not limited with those between Ottoman authorities and Allied powers. As many panelists have raised for 2 days, the problems among the Allied powers themselves, especially between the British and French officials, became apparent from time to time. In his memoir, Turkey in Travail, Harold Armstrong, a British state official in Constantinople during the occupation period, describes the inter-Allied organization as impractical due to the antagonistic relationship between the British and French commanders. Quote, there was no common policy nor even common sentiment among the allies, and there was no coordination of man and force. As to the British, there was no settled policy, and for the first 12 months, no general line of policy was laid down, except High Commissioner should avoid all the complications that might affect future decisions. The results were pathetic, for the High Commissioners did little but to watch each other jealously and ensure that none of their colleagues obtained any special advantages. The nearest waited for reconstruction, but the Allies did nothing that was constructive, unquote. Compared to Armstrong's observation, what I have noticed from the correspondence between the Allied powers has not been an antagonistic relationship, but the effort to persuade the other party in decision-making process is quite apparent. In December 1918, when the Ottoman government closed cinemas due to the coal shortage, a French officer, I assume that was Monsieur Picard, a French engineer appointed in the Technical Commission of the Allied Forces, informed the British High Commissioner about this decision. Cinemas, as both Özde Çeliktemel and Odile Moro emphasized in their talks, and as Daniel very well depicted in his book, became quite important during the occupation period, not only as entertainment facilities, but also as propaganda hubs to mobilize people. Especially during the First World War, the film reels facilitated soldiers to establish a cultural bond with their home countries, and now, in the armistice period, this was thought to be a good opportunity for Allied power soldiers. The High Commissioner decided to consult with the electric company to see if any dispensations might be made. The technical personnel of the company suggested that since surplus electrical energy was usually generated between 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. and 11 p.m., running cinemas at these hours would not impact the coal reserve. While the French officer favored this idea, the High Commissioner had concerns about how the authorities could justify opening cinemas to Istanbulites while trams, the main mode of land transportation in the city, remained out of service. He was concerned that Istanbulites would think that the occupation forces were wasting electricity to entertain themselves. On the other hand, the French officer claimed that the amount of electricity used by tram lines and cinemas was not comparable, with trams consuming far more power. Moreover, he argued that both military forces and city inhabitants benefited from cinemas, adding that during the war, the Germans had used the cinemas of Istanbul very effectively and that Allied forces should do the same. If not, he suggested that both the occupying soldiers and the general population would feel they were being deprived of a gift of modern life. Soon after these conversations, cinemas reopened for certain art, mostly screening propaganda movies. Meanwhile, in March 1919, the Silahlara power plant's need for coal was partially satisfied by the Ereğli and Zonguldak basins. Electricity started to be supplied to the city again, and after 4 months in depots, the trams were put back into service, but only after the municipality agreed to quadruple fares after all. As Erol Ülker also mentioned in his works, the mobility of the city's inhabitants became so reliant on tramways that the massive increase in the tramways had no effect on the number of tram passengers. On the contrary, this figure increased significantly during the armistice period. According to Tram and Electricity Company reports, there were 178 tram locomotives and 78 trailers in use in 1921, carrying approximately 55 million passengers, while the funicular carried approximately 16 million. To put it another way, approximately 200,000 passengers used trams and funiculars on a daily basis to travel throughout Istanbul. What is more interesting is, despite all the political, financial, and technical challenges, both during the war and occupation period, the number of electricity subscribers as well increased. So you can see the increase from 1914 to 1924 in this chart. To conclude, as many scholars of history of technology emphasized, technologies and infrastructures offer a productive side to examine the connections between political rationality, financial and material structures. Tracing debates around coal scarcity and the use and non-use of electricity in the early months of occupied Istanbul, I wanted to underscore the ideological overtones of electricity use in high politics in a period of multiple governing agents. After the 1908 revolution, which coincided with the growing international use of electrical technology, but more importantly, with the growing demand of the city population, the city's electrification became an obligation rather than a choice. Due to a lack of homegrown experience, trained technical staff and funding, the CUP had to collaborate with multinational companies. World War I, however, transformed the city's political and financial balances, which also had an impact on the electrification of the city. Frequent coal shortages, for instance, caused serious challenges for production and conflicts over the use of electricity. The conversation between the local authorities and Allied powers representatives indicated the ways in which energy shortages exposed the politics of infrastructure provision, while also producing new social hierarchies in the city and generating a contested terrain for political negotiation. These debates, by bringing the environmental component of electrical infrastructure into the picture, also highlight the deep interconnectedness of seemingly unrelated technologies like coal extraction, transportation, trams, or cinemas. Thank you.